Okay, it looks like most people are connected to audio now, so we will get started. And as more join, we'll let them into the webinar. So, in general, I'll just begin here. Thank you, and welcome to Grain Farmers of Ontario Grain Talk webinar series focusing on soil fertility. I'm Laura Ferrier, an agronomist with Grain Farmers of Ontario, and thank you so much for joining us today. This is the second of three webinars focusing on soil fertility. This webinar in particular focuses on the interpretation of results and turning analysis into recommendation, plus credits for manure and cover crops and tools to use. The first webinar in the series was focused on soil sampling, the how, the why, and the when, where the general learnings were that as crop yields increased, crop nutrient removal also increases, and that it is so important to recognize and monitor soil test data. Sampling correctly at the right depth, in the right areas, and at the right time, while avoiding challenging conditions such as extremely dry or frozen ground, is a great start to your soil fertility plan. For more learnings and from our first soil fertility webinar, you can visit the Grain Farmers of Ontario YouTube channel to watch that webinar. And coming up next week is the third and final webinar of the series, and it will focus on how to take a recommendation and turn it into a fertilization plan. By registering for this particular webinar, you will also get reminders for attending the remaining webinar next week. While each webinar stands on its own, the series is designed to tell the complete story, from soil sampling to building a fertilization plan and implementing that plan on your farm. So we encourage you to watch or attend them all. This presentation, of course, as with the others, is being recorded and will be posted on the Grain Farmers of Ontario YouTube channel for future reference should you want it. This webinar, along with others in the series, are eligible for CCA CUs and off-CAF KSEs. QR codes to scan will be available at the end of the presentation. And of course, we welcome and encourage questions, but we will aim to ask them all at the end. At that point, you're welcome to either unmute and ask in the general chat that I can read out loud at the end, or you're also welcome to direct message myself at any point, and I will happily share the questions with our guest speakers. And now, I'm very pleased to have two speakers here with us today, both having worked with farmers on various soil fertility topics throughout their careers. I'll quickly introduce both of them and let them share their presentations. So Colin Elgie is the soil fertility specialist with field crops with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. Colin's focus is to improve the agronomic, economic, and environmental aspects of soil and crop nutrition while learning from farmers and researchers across Ontario. Colin has been with OMAFA since 2022, and prior to which he worked as an agronomist for an ag retailer in southwestern Ontario for 13 years after graduating from the University of Guelph with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture. Colin holds his CCA designation with the 4R Nutrient Management Specialty. And we also have joining us today, Christine Brown. She's a field crop sustainability specialist with OMAFA. Her work focuses on issues and best management practices around nutrient and soil management using manure and organic amendments. Christine is also a certified crop advisor with a 4R nutrient management specialty as well. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Let me see. All right. So yeah, like Laura mentioned, last week we kind of took a look at everything that's involved in getting that soil test in your hands right from taking the soil in the field to getting that page that's got the results on it. And now we're going to look at part of what I think is often one of the most challenging aspects of the whole fertility plan is taking that soil test and really making sense of it, making it work as far as turning it into what should I do with fertilizer on my farm. And so really, this is what it boils down to. When we take that soil test, we get a nice report. Depending on the lab, it may look similar to this. It may look completely different to this. The important part is that we are sending it to the lab. We are getting those accredited extractions so that we know that the amount of phosphorus, the amount of potassium, the pH, the micronutrients, the secondary nutrients, all that stuff fits with Ontario soils, and that we can expect or not expect a response based on the levels that we see. So, for simplicity, here's one sample that I've got shown here on this report. Depending on the field, like we mentioned last week, if you're using different technologies or sampling with a grid or zone sample, or using sensor-based sampling to really hone in on that field, figure out where the differences lie. You may have a number of samples that show up on the report, and depending on whether you're looking at it on a piece of paper or in a software, can be viewed in multiple different ways. The important thing is that we've got that soil sample that really shows us those results, and we can trust that it's from an accredited lab, meaning that those results will actually mean something for the soils that we have here in Ontario. So if we look at kind of that whole broad picture of what we're doing a soil test for, it's looking at that soil test, what that nutrient capacity is within that soil, putting it together with an intended crop, and really looking at what does that crop need to grow. And from both of those, creating a fertility plan. And really, that fertility plan involves not just what that crop needs to grow, but looking at maximizing that profitability. And a lot of times that may be taking advantage of the nutrients that are already in that soil. It may mean adding a lot or a little bit of certain types of nutrients to that field to be able to grow it profitably. But it's kind of that whole picture of what we're soil testing for is that fertility plan that comes. And so today we're going to take a look at a few different things here. But what it comes down to is oftentimes get the question of, I've got one soil test, I give it to two different agronomists, and I get three or more different recommendations. And it seems like, agronomists may be trying to, make ourselves seem like we're super smart and can translate stuff that you can't even see. But what it all boils down to is what fertilizer should I apply to my farm? And unfortunately, there's no simple answer because there's a lot of different variables and a lot of different ways that we can apply fertilizer to that farm. And it really depends on your fertilization philosophy. So, kind of like Socrates here, there's a lot of different things that we can look at, and it may differ in the goals that you have for an individual farm compared to your neighbor, compared even to different farms that you work in your own operation. So we're going to look at that. What fertilizer should I apply to my farm? And going to look at three different ways here that we can kind of answer that question. So the first philosophy is what we call the sufficiency approach. And this is where we're looking to fertilize according to the response of that fertilizer. So when we apply something like phosphorus, we want to know that the amount that we apply is going to pay for itself in a yield increase. So otherwise, we're not going to apply it if we don't see that yield increase substantially just based off that nutrient that we apply. On the other end, we've got what's called a build and maintain approach. And so this is fertilizing according to the potential. So at high or moderate soil test levels, we know we can get, generally speaking, a better yield than we can at low soil test levels. And so this approach aims to maintain those soil test levels, especially phosphorus and potassium, at those moderate or high testing levels. In some cases, we may be bringing down those high testing levels, but keeping it at a kind of a plateau of where we can expect to get a good yield, and maybe in some cases give us a bit more flexibility on whether we need to fertilize or whether we can adjust fertility depending on the season, depending on the economics, all that kind of thing. And in the middle here, and one that is often talked about, but may not be looked at as a philosophy, but as crop removal. And so this is fertilizing according to the yield. So simply whatever nutrients get pulled out of that crop at harvest, so things like phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, our secondary nutrients, our micronutrients, we're looking to replace those nutrients that are removed with harvest. And so in some cases, you can go very in depth, look at all the micronutrients, the secondaries, but in a lot of cases, we're talking about those ones that we remove in large amounts, the phosphorus and potassium, and really replacing those nutrients more or less as they come off with yield. And so if we look at how that fertilization, what really changes soil test levels in no matter what philosophy you're using, what goals you have, anytime that we're applying more than crop removal, we'll be increasing our soil test levels. Anytime we're applying less than crop removal, we'll be drawing down our soil test levels. And anytime we're kind of matching that crop removal number, that's where we maintain it. So this seems relatively simple, and this is a very simple way to look at it. In the real world, there's a lot of different interactions that go on within our soil, and a lot that we can't really get a definite answer on exactly how they work. So it doesn't always work as cleanly as I'm showing it here, but in general, this is kind of the theory of fertilization. And so if we look at our soil test report here again, there's a lot of different numbers on there, but we're really going to hone in on a few things on this specific soil test, just kind of as an example, and look at where it can take us with our three different philosophies. So to simplify it a little bit, we're going to look at pH, our buffer pH, our phosphorus, and our potassium tests. In this case, we've got an intended crop of grain corn with a yield goal of 200 bushels per acre on a sandy loam soil. And so that is going to differ quite a bit, obviously, depending on where you are, what crops you're growing. But just as an example, these are the things we're looking at. And you'll notice we've kind of left out especially one very, very important nutrient that we need for corn, and that is nitrogen. And you might consider sulfur that as well. But really, what we're focusing here is on reading that soil test, and we'll touch a bit on nitrogen, especially later. And it's critically important to how we grow our crops, but it's something that we may not be able to pick up right off a soil test quite as easily and make a plan with it. But to get started, we're going to look at three different approaches here, and our first agronomist is Sally. Sally likes the sufficiency approach to fertilization. She really looks at the economic factor, and so knowing that with this approach, she can apply fertilizer, have it paid for in that year. Otherwise, she may be adjusting her rates or not applying fertilizer. She figures that's the best approach for this given farm. And so Sally uses the agronomy guide for field crops, OMAFA publication 811 for that. And really, there's as we'll get into here, there's a lot of different resources within that guide to help guide where she wants to take that fertilization plan. So starting with our soil pH of 6.0, we can look at the chart here, and these are the guidelines for lime application to Ontario crops. So depending on the crop specifically that is being grown, there are different kind of target soil pHs, and along with that target soil pH, there's a bit of a buffer there of, when it's actually going to pay to apply that lime, and when that lime is really going to add value to that cropping system. So looking at this, we know in this case we're on a sandy loam soil. We're looking for a crop of corn. And so we can see that in this case, we're actually targeting a pH of 6. In a lot of cases, a higher pH may be perfectly fine. And in a lot of Ontario, we're dealing with higher pHs to begin with. So it's really that target pH is more or less 6.0 and above to a certain degree. Once we get to a very high pH, it can start to tie up nutrients again. But just in the interest of time here, we're going to kind of focus just on the scenario at hand here. So with this in case, Sally's looking at these guidelines for lime application. 6.0, that's right on the target for corn. And so there's not really going to be any benefit to applying lime in this field at this current time. So Sally's recommendation is no lime required. That seems pretty straightforward. And in this case, it is. It's a simple factor of we're well within that range we need to be. So we might as well not apply lime, wait for that pH to maybe change in a subsequent soil test. Now we're going to look at phosphorus and potassium. And so we'd consider these generally low soil test levels. or in this case, highly responsive. So again, using the OMAFA guidelines for phosphorus and potassium response, as we can see in publication 811, the agronomy guide, we can look and simply find on our charts the soil test levels that we have in the field and come up with a recommendation for that particular field. So we can also see that beside each of those test levels and the recommendation for phosphorus and potassium, we can see that there's letters there, HR, MR, LR, etc. And those are really the chance of response to that added fertilizer. So in both cases, based on the soil test levels that we have here, they're rated as highly responsive. And so that means that we are most likely to see a response to that nutrient in the year of application. As we get down to higher soil test levels further on in the charts there, we can see that at, for example, 40 part per million of phosphorus, we'd see our recommendation is 0 phosphate required because we get a rare response. It really doesn't pay to apply to that particular field in a high chance or a high percentage of cases, and so we'd save our money there. Obviously, the lower soil tests are going to require a higher rate of fertilizer to really account for what that crop needs and what that crop will be pulling out. So lower soil test levels, be able to get lower soil nutrient from those soils, and so higher rates are required for fertilization. So Sally's recommendation for phosphorus and potassium, according to the charts here, just to put it in, I'd say conventional or, uh, U.S. imperial terms in pounds per acre, 63 pounds of actual phosphate and 98 pounds of actual potassium per acre. And she's recommending broadcast to speed up planting efficiency. So a good recommendation always comes with a way to really look at that in terms of how it's applied. And so Sally's approach, using the sufficiency approach to this corn fertility plan, is using MAP and potash in a broadcast at 121 pounds per acre of MAP and 163 pounds per acre of potash. Real focus is on that best economic return in a single year, while still ensuring there's enough to feed the crop. So switching it up now, we're going to look at our second agronomist, whose name is Carl. Carl likes the sufficiency approach as well, but he's concerned that the nutrients that we are removing from that field with harvest is outpacing what's actually being applied. And so if we look back at the charts that I showed previously, we can see that as we get down to those higher soil test levels, they actually are lower than crop removal values like we can see here. And so Carl wants to ensure that that crop removal, those calculations, they're a major part of the plan. And so obviously these are kind of just more or less standard yields for a lot of the province. In some cases, we may be much lower yielding. In some cases, we may be much higher yielding. But these are kind of the actual nutrients that are removed from that crop as we take that grain or plant matter off of the field. And so Carl wants to ensure that we are not dropping any further. So if we look at the soil pH again, Carl notes no immediate benefit for that corn crop to lime, but he knows that the farmer, Joe, grows wheat in the rotation, which is more sensitive to low pH. And so it's not necessarily always as simple as an individual crop. It's looking at that whole rotation and how that fertility can affect it. So Carl's recommendation is to apply lime at 0.9 tons per acre before that wheat is planted. And if we look at the phosphorus and potassium levels, we generally consider those low test levels. Carl wants to know both what OMAFA's production guidelines are, as well as the nutrient removal values, in order to choose a level that not just gives a response, but also prevents those soil test levels from dropping any further. And so looking at basically the production recommendations like we had in our first scenario, and the crop removal for that same crop, same yield goal, Carl's approach uses, at minimum, the OMAFA guidelines for production for both phosphorus and potassium. Otherwise, he's going to look at using those crop removal values. So basically, in his mind, he's picking the higher of those two values. So at those soil test levels, Carl's recommending using the crop removal value for phosphorus and the production recommendation for potassium. And so Carl knows in general with a low testing phosphorus, especially having some as a starter can really affect and improve the efficiency of that. The potassium, just for the interest of speeding up that approach, he's recommending a broadcast scenario. And so Carl's overall fertility plan, again, looking at 84 pounds of phosphorus and 98 pounds of potassium per acre. Carl's recommending a starter band of a liquid 624-6 at 5 US gallons per acre, and a spring broadcast of the rest of the phosphorus as well as the potassium, that full shot on the field. So his target is really looking to maximize that phosphorus efficiency with that starter while maintaining the soil levels overall, to ensure that those levels aren't continuing to decrease over time. Now, our third agronomist, a little bit different approach to fertilization that we're going to look at here. Starting again with our soil pH, Becky notes that there's no immediate benefit to lime for the corn crop, but she knows that Farmer Joe has wheat in his rotation, and wheat actually prefers a bit higher pH. Becky's also looking at Joe's entire system. He's a no-till farmer for the most part, for soybeans and wheat. And so strip tilling ahead of corn means that there's a chance that he could get that lime applied now and be able to get a bit better chance of mixing in that soil. So whether or not he's strip tilling, it also gives more time for that pH to raise. So if you've had experience with lime on your own farm, you'll notice that it's not something that is often immediately available. It does take time to mix in that soil to disperse to get to work. And so Becky's recommendation is to actually apply that lime now ahead of the corn crop, hoping that it will get mixed in and get to work neutralizing that acidity a bit more by the time Farmer Joe goes to plant his wheat. And so again, looking at the phosphorus and potassium, Becky's not a fan of this efficiency approach, so she feels it limits the potential yield of that particular field. She prefers the build and maintenance approach. So looking at soil nutrients like an investment, meaning higher upfront costs, hoping for that higher return in later years, sorry. So what that kind of looks like is at low soil test levels, we're applying a higher level than crop removal values. So we're building that soil up at a kind of a critical to maintenance limit range, kind of that moderate to borderline high testing soils. We're more or less applying what that crop is removing. And as we get to the high soil test levels, that's where we can draw down. We can apply less than crop removal because we're getting no added value whatsoever from that fertilizer and really giving more of a chance for that fertilizer to be lost to the environment. So what does the data say? Does this approach actually work? Does it make sense? So looking at a long-term trial here led by Dr. Dave Hooker at 4 different locations, including the research station at Ridgetown and Elora, as well as fields at Lucan and Bornholm in Ontario, looking at the response of fertilizer to low testing soils, whether or not they were built up using that build and maintain approach. So to start here with corn, we've got two different comparisons here. So in this case, the soils were low testing soils to begin with, and they were either not built or built up to approximately 20 part per million phosphorus and 120 part per million potassium, kind of as a guideline for what they were using. And then to each of those different scenarios, so the exact same soil, one with low testing levels, one with moderate testing levels, they applied different starters. So uh, basically a control with zero fertilizer, a phosphorus only, a potassium only, and then a mix of phosphorus and potassium, and applying those to both the unbuilt soils and the built soils. So what the results showed is that in a moderate testing soil test level, like we've got on the right two bars here, we can see that we've generally got our highest chance at our high yields. We can also see that there's a small response to a added fertilizer, but a not significant one. So in this case, about 9 bushels on average, but not significant to adding that starter in, fertilizing that moderate testing soil. But when we compare that to our low testing soils, we can see that there's absolutely a big response to that fertilizer. And in a lot of cases, we would absolutely need that fertilizer to be able to get our maximum profitable yield off of that piece. So what this shows is that that build and maintain approach really does increase our kind of yield plateaus, so our lower ends of our yields. If we look at the no starter, so the orange bars in each case, we can see that where no fertilizer was added, we've got a lot of reserves in that soil on that built soil, that moderate testing soil already, that we've essentially got a 40 bushel yield response in corn without any starter fertilizer. So no fertilizer whatsoever. We've still got a higher chance of getting those high yields if we've got moderate testing soils to begin with. And the same holds true for both soybeans and wheat. In every cases, if we're looking for those top yields, we can't quite reach those with a low testing level, low soil test levels for phosphorus and potassium. And we can with our higher soil testing levels. In some cases, we can see a minor response to added fertility at those moderate testing levels. But really, if we're looking for that long-term approach, it looks like that build and maintain approach does work. There's a lot of nuance to it, including how you build, how much fertilizer you're putting on at any one time. There's a lot of chance for doing it wrong, but in cases, or in this case, there is benefit at the end of the day to using that build and maintain approach for that fertilization. So Becky's looking at that data. She's looking at her own approach, and her approach is to work to build both those P and K levels, knowing that they're relatively low testing, they're highly responsive to added fertilizer. And so, like I mentioned before, in a low testing soil, adding more than crop removal for either phosphorus and potassium will build those levels. If we're on the higher test levels, we're looking to draw those down, and so she's recommending to apply less than crop removal. And Farmer Joe, she's talked to him. His target is to get to around that 20 part per million of phosphorus and 120 part per million of potassium. She knows that to build soil test levels by 1 part per million requires about 35 pounds of actual phosphorus per acre and about 20 pounds of actual potassium per acre. So it does differ a bit depending on the soils you're on, but those are kind of a general guideline. So knowing Joe's target, she's kind of designed a few different ways to look at this. So, this is a way to create that recommendation where you're looking at really specific targets, specific time to build those soils at. And so we've got where we're at, where we're aiming to be, the time, including that crop removal for each year of application, and coming up with a recommended rate. So it can be very detailed, and in a lot of cases, depending on the farm, you may be looking for this level of detail. Can also be rather simple. So a lot of the challenge I find with translating soil tests is that we may be trying to go too much towards figuring out an exact rate. So should with this target, with Farmer Joe's target of 20 part per million, our existing soil test levels, should that be 126 pounds of phosphorus per acre? Should it be 130? Should it be 125? I find we're maybe often trying to get a bit too fine-tuned when in reality the soils themselves play such a big factor that having it fine-tuned to the single pound or decimals of a kilogram maybe a little bit overkill. So it can be relatively simple. If we're looking to build the soils, we need to apply more than crop removal. So it might be something like crop removal plus 10% to build that soil, or 5% or 20%, or whatever. And so Becky's going to look at that. Her recommendation is that at minimum, she's using OMAFA production guidelines because she wants a highly responsive soil to be able to match that level of response to make sure that there's enough there to meet those crop production guidelines. Otherwise, if the recommendation calls for it, she's going to look at a 10% build, so 10% more than phosphorus removal and more than potassium removal. And once she hits those targets of 20 part per million of phosphorus and 120 part per million of potassium, she's going to remove that build factor. So it'd essentially be maintaining those soil test levels at that 20 and 120 parts per million. And so with that, for Farmer Joe's field here, she's recommending 92 pounds of phosphate per acre, which is a 10% build over crop removal. And in the case of potassium, she's actually using that OMAFA guideline still. So crop removal for 200 bushels is approximately 58 pounds of potassium, and the guidelines are actually 98 pounds for that at test level. So she's using a mix of the two different approaches here. So her recommendation for this year is lime and lime in the fall with a strip till application that Joe uses here, recommending the potash be applied in the fall. Potentially worried about things like salt load or potential for injury to that crop, doing it in the spring. Maybe he's doing a fall strip anyways and wants to speed up the spring pass by putting less fertilizer on. But recommending the MAP in the spring to take advantage of the nitrogen that's in that phosphorus and make sure that it's available for that crop. So her targets for Farmer Joe are to build those low soil test levels and looking to incorporate those higher fertilizer rates to prevent any potential losses. So what's also covered on a fertility plan here is nitrogen, and it always uses this efficiency approach. And using tools like the Ontario Corn N calculator, a pre-side dress nitrate test, or testing on farm are the best ways to really get around and understanding what nitrogen works on your farm. So it's not something that's covered on a soil test unless we're looking specifically at that nitrate test. But this is something that is going to be on any fertility plan that you're making for the farm. We also look at our secondary and micronutrients. So in the case of sulfur or boron, again, we're looking at that sufficiency approach. Because those nutrients are leachable, we want to make sure that we're getting the best response in that year of application. When it comes to magnesium and calcium, again, we're looking for that response. So whether we need to apply those nutrients or not, and it may differ depending on the individual field. But if we're in low testing levels, those are nutrients that can be built up over time. And in the case of our micronutrients, zinc and manganese, they are ones that are very crop dependent. So depending on what crop's being grown in there, we may be looking to simply get that response in the year of application. We may be looking more of a long-term plan. And they are nutrients that are very pH dependent. So in the case of in really all of our fertility plans, that pH is so critical that it should be the number one thing that we're focused on if we're in a acidic soil type. So which of these plans is right for Farmer Joe? So all three agronomists, they've all done a good job. They've looked at the different approach that they're using and recommending for Farmer Joe. And so none of those is inherently right or wrong, but they all need to match up with Farmer Joe's input. So using 4R nutrient management, looking at the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place, we've really got to match up with what Farmer Joe needs. So his fertilization goals, his equipment, his rotation, and his budget. And if we don't have any of those things, that's where we get a poor fertility plan for the farmer. So, to really hone in on this, it doesn't matter what approach we're using. It's got to match what that farmer needs for the individual field, what that equipment is, what the rotation is, and how to best utilize that. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Chris Brown here, and she can take us into a bit deeper look at what we're talking about.
Thanks, Colin. So, did I request control?
Yes. You might need to use those arrows at the bottom left of the screen.
Bottom left. I don't see them. Oh, okay.
Yeah, right down there.
It's not doing anything.
Was there skids
okay. Now.
the day before?
There we go.
Yeah.
Because I looked at what.
Okay, so
for reds and yellows.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I'm going to take over right from where you left off. So one of the things that Farmer Joe forgot to tell the consultants is that he has manure. And the kind of manure is going to make a difference on what kind of nutrients we can expect. But a good fertility plan matches the soil test, it matches the farmer's need, but it also needs to match the nutrient inventory that's on the farm. And so one of the credits that we look at in that nutrient inventory is from previous crops. So in this case, it would be nitrogen credits potentially from alfalfa or from red clover, from cover crops. And that's going to, it's nitrogen credits. But if we've got a cover crop, we've also potentially got some improvement in our soil health and potentially in that nutrient cycling, which sometimes can make phosphorus a little bit more available, potash a little bit more available, some of the micronutrients. I'm not going to spend much time on these credits, except to say that the credits are different if we're looking at corn versus if we're looking at any crop in general. And so those are available in the agronomy guide and in the corn calculator. So nutrient management planning considerations when it comes to manure in that nutrient inventory. First is, what is the fertility status of the cropped fields? So in Farmer Joe's case, we've got low fertility levels, but the overall status is important. And then how much nutrient is being removed over the whole period of the rotation. And the reason that's important is because we're looking at opportunities from a 4R perspective, especially on where in the rotation is that manure added so that it's the most effective, and where in that rotation is commercial fertilizer added, again, for 4R placement and also for economic purposes. And so then over that rotation, how do our manure application, fertilizer application affect that long-term fertility status? And so Farmer Joe's soil test report, the crop removal was 84 for corn at 200 bushels, 58 for potassium. So the recommendations, the removal, it's just for the current crop. It's not looking at that full rotation. And the first thing with manure is it's really hard to give a nutrient credit if we don't take a manure analysis. And so in that manure analysis, ideally, we're looking for what are the nutrients that are applied to that field. So the best time, of course, to measure those nutrients is at the time of application, which in some cases means we need to use database numbers just for estimates until we get our results back. But the next question is the manure application rate set for the nitrogen or for the phosphorus? Most of the time, and we always say that you should never apply 100% of your nutrients from manure, especially nitrogen, because we just can't assume that that availability is going to be 100% and that it gets to the crop exactly when it's needed. But most of the time, the application rate is set to match somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of that nitrogen, especially if it's with liquid manure. With solid manure, it's probably not going to match the nitrogen needs. But in this case, I'm looking at two different manure types. Farmer Joe has liquid hog manure, that's a finisher manure, and then he's got liquid hog, sorry, the sow manure is 1.4% dry matter. The liquid manure that's from finisher hogs is 9.3% dry matter. So a lot thicker, a lot more concentrated. So if we're looking at the watery manure, the sow manure, we're getting about 20 pounds of available nitrogen per 1,000 gallons, about 9 for phosphorus and about 15 for potassium, and about 1.4 for sulfur. Where we've got that thicker manure, we've got a lot more nitrogen, about 47 pounds of available nitrogen per 1,000 gallons, 35, so more than 3 times what we're getting in that liquid, the liquidy manure, and then 35 pounds of potassium and about 4 pounds of sulfur per 1,000 gallons. And so one of the things to note is that the phosphorus is higher in the solids, where the potassium is higher in the liquid portion of that manure. So as we get thicker manure, we're going to tend to see higher phosphorus levels. The other thing I just want to note from the manure analysis, I've got the pH and the carbon to nitrogen ratio underlined. Those are really important in looking at that nitrogen. pH of 8.25, any of that ammonia nitrogen that we've got is easily lost. 1-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio means that that organic portion that's left is highly available. This one on the finisher hog manure, pH of 6.7, so not as much potential for loss as when we have a high pH, and still pretty quick turnover of that organic nitrogen. Okay, so when it comes to the phosphorus, not all the phosphorus in manure is going to be immediately available. And it depends a little bit on what kind of manure we're talking about, but I'm going to compare it to that drippings or to the sponge. And we put that sponge into water, we take that sponge out, and we've got water that's just dripping out. That's similar to the phosphorus that's in that manure. If we squeeze that sponge, we get more of that nitrogen, or sorry, of that phosphorus or water out of it. That's similar to the phosphorus that becomes available over the period of that crop rotation. After we've squeezed that sponge is still damp. That's similar to the phosphorus that might be too tightly bound to the soil, or phosphorus that's potentially lost through runoff or soil erosion. The potassium in manure is considered almost completely available, 90% as available as the potassium in fertilizer. And then the nitrogen, the ammonium portion is immediately available or potentially lost if it's not managed properly. The organic portion is slow release. It can be basically years that we're still going to see some of that organic nitrogen, especially in some of those solid manures like poultry manure. It provides the soil microbial benefit, and I'm going to talk about that in a few slides. So generally, the organic nitrogen portion, we assume, and again, it depends a little bit on carbon to nitrogen ratios, bedding, that kind of thing, but we assume generally 30% of that nitrogen is available in the year of application, 10% the following year, 5% the year after that, 2% the year after that. So it's decreasing over those years, but you see that benefit. And where we get manure applied every year or frequently, where we've got that nutrient buildup, we see the availability is higher, and we've got just better microbial activity, better nutrient cycling. And so where we've got those frequent applications of manure, we tend to get higher phosphorus levels, higher potassium levels. We also tend to get higher microbial nutrient cycling, but we also get higher micronutrient levels in that soil. And so where we've got frequent manure application, we probably don't need the zinc and the magnesium or manganese as frequently as if we aren't applying manure. So there's more to manure than just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We've got that organic matter. That organic matter is contributing carbon. Carbon is feeding the microorganisms in the soil. It's also providing some secondary and micronutrients. So calcium, magnesium, sulfur, manganese, zinc, boron, just to name a few. Manure contributes to improved nutrient dynamics and soil health. So the nutrients in the organic form mineralize more slowly, and so they become available over a prolonged period of time. So we're getting soil release. It's there when the crops need it, hopefully. Organic matter improves the CEC of the soil to hold potentially more positively charged nutrients. The manure feeds the soil microorganisms, which increases the nutrient cycling. And so even if we've got low soil test levels, that nutrient cycling can make those nutrients available so that we don't see those deficiencies. And organic amendments can help improve the nutrient availability by buffering pH, by chelating micronutrients, and then just by that improved root capacity so that the roots can access more nutrients in the soil. And this is just a slide that in the recording, you can take a closer look at it, but there are micronutrients in solid and liquid manure. It's very much based on ration, so these are averages, but it shows you that there can be a significant amount of calcium and magnesium and sulfur, especially in the solid manure, but even in the liquid manure. So if we're applying 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 gallons per acre, we're going to increase the amount of those nutrients that we're adding significantly. And so going to switch over to some of the tools that are available for helping with nutrient management. And so the AgriSuite set of tools include quite a few. We're basically just going to look at the field management tool, and then those encompass the crop nutrient tool, the organic amendment tool, the fertilizer tool, and then some of the environmental assessment tools in the background. And so we're going to walk through the field management plan. The crop nutrient calculator uses the soil test and crop removal to give some ideas of what is the amount of nutrients we should consider adding to the field. The manure calculator gives us the available nutrients from manure. The fertilizer calculator helps us to balance what we're applying without the manure. And then the P index and the N index are the environmental indicators. We've got other tools like the manure storage and sizing that can give us an idea of how much manure might we have to add to that field. And then the greenhouse gas calculator gives us an idea of what kind of carbon emissions we might be getting based on different management practices. So this is the crop nutrient tool. The crop nutrient tool, I put in my yield goal, I put in my location. It gives me an idea of what is my production recommendations based on soil test and based on the nitrogen calculator. And then it also gives me that nutrient removal based on my just my crop removal and yield. The nitrogen calculator is built into the AgriSuite tool. So if you click on the I button, it gives you the different parts of that the corn calculator. Oops, did I go too far? And then walking through, using the manure calculator or the organic amendment calculator. So in this case, I'm using the finisher hog that's at 9.3 or the more concentrated manure. I give the analysis information, and then I give the management information. When will it be applied? How will it be applied? How quickly will it be incorporated? The difference in my nitrogen availability especially will be quite different if I'm applying it in the spring versus I'm applying it in late summer or in late fall. So in this case, in the spring, incorporated with 1 day. So I would expect about almost 45 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons, about 35 pounds of phosphorus, and about 35 pounds of potash. So if I'm applying at 3,500 imperial gallons per acre, I'm going to meet a little bit more than 75% of my nitrogen requirements. I'm going to meet more than the phosphorus and more than the potash. So basically, I'm looking at a little bit of build. The value at 3,500 gallons, just looking at NPK value, not accounting for the organic matter or the micronutrients, is about $275 per 1,000 gallons after application. And that's just the application, not the travel distance. And then I've also got some trace elements, micronutrients that are being applied. So in this case, at this rate, about 13 pounds of sulfur, about 35 pounds of magnesium, about 75 pounds of calcium, 3 pounds of zinc. So it just gives you an idea of what kind of nutrients can I expect from that manure application. And so now I'm taking the field management plan, and what I've done is I've included just the crop. I've just included the crop rotation. I'm on the left-hand side comparing the agronomic, or basically the soil test and corn calculator numbers, where on the right-hand side, I'm looking at crop removal. And so it gives me an idea of what is the nutrient needs based on my soil test numbers. And so over that corn, soybean, wheat rotation, over those 3 years, I'm looking at requiring about 300 pounds of nitrogen, 125 pounds of phosphorus, and 188 pounds of potash, looking just at that sufficiency approach. If I look at the crop removal, at the other hand, it's quite a bit more. So over that same period of time, now it shows the nitrogen here, but it shows the soybeans, which really isn't true. So 200 pounds of phosphorus, 300 pounds of potash. Basically, what I would look at is, if over that rotation, if I didn't add any fertilizer, or manure, I would be drawing that phosphorus soil test down by about 6 parts per million, that potash soil test by about 15 parts per million. So it gives me an idea of what do I need to add, and basically looking at where can I add. So I might apply that manure ahead of a corn crop. I might apply some ahead of winter, or ahead of planting wheat, depending on weather conditions. So it looks at opportunities of where can I apply that manure, how much can I apply to build or maintain my soil fertility levels. And so now I'm taking that same crop rotation, but I'm adding my finisher hog manure in the spring. I'm adding some starter as well, because I don't expect all that nitrogen is going to be available right away. And then for the soybean year, I'm not adding, oh no, I am. I'm adding a little bit of fertilizer. If I didn't add that fertilizer, then I would basically be balanced at exactly what the crop removes, where if I'm adding a little bit to build that soil fertility level, this is a good opportunity to apply it. And with the wheat, in this case, I'm just adding the starter and the fertilizer. But it's basically looking at where can I apply those nutrients, what can I apply, and what does that do to my fertility level over that crop rotation. In this case, it's a slight build, but not basically just 1 part per million for phosphorus and almost 3 for potash. And then the other thing with the field calculator, if I go to the nutrient balance, I get the different indicators. And really what I wanted to show here is that there's the economic indicator to say I'm not quite meeting what I need, but that's where you look at the bottom line. And then the I here, this is 11 pounds of the nitrogen credit from the manure that was applied in the corn year. And that's one that people often forget about. The other indexes, the nitrogen index, the phosphorus index, basically, if these I's are green, it's good. If they're yellow, you need to start looking at, okay, am I applying it at the right time? Am I applying too much? If they're red, it means that there's environmental risk, and we really should take a look at it. In this case, looking just at what I did in this one plan, it's telling me that I've got about 36 tons of carbon equivalents in greenhouse gas emissions. It's a whole new tool, but it gives an idea of how does different management practices change those emissions. And so the field management plan reveals how management can affect overall fertility status over a complete crop rotation using manure, fertilizer, and cover crop credits or alfalfa credits. The AgriSuite tool uses Ontario data, so it's basically all the same data that you would find in the agronomy guide. You can do the whole, like I can use the manure calculator for just one example, or I can make an account and save that data. And once I get the results, I can use those calculations and then fine tune it, save it over time. Creating an account allows you to save the data, allows you to share it if you wanted to with your consultant. It allows you to update it with yields and with whatever. It's got interchangeable units, metric, imperial, US. I can change them on the go. So if I'm using imperial for how much manure is in the storage, but my tanker is in US gallons, I can change that on the go. It's in English and French, and it's also available in phone, tablet, or computer formats. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Colin, and or to Laura, and I think there's a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you to both Colin and Christine for your presentation. Some great information that you both shared. Some brief takeaways that I gathered were how to take that soil test and make it work for you. As with anything, there are variables to creating a fertilizer plan depending on your fertilization philosophy, whether it be sufficiency, building a chain, or crop removal approaches for phosphorus and potassium and the grower's needs. And when looking at nitrogen applications, it is always by the sufficiency approach, and that needs to be considered, of course. And then secondary nutrients like sulfur, boron, magnesium, calcium, zinc, and more are also important to consider. And then rotation, manure, and cover crop credits need to also be taken into account, along with their ability throughout the rotation to make a really fulsome plan. And I really am glad, Chris, that you were able to take some time to really dive into the AgriSuite calculators, because they are some great tools that are available to growers to help create a field management plan. So as we are going on here, if you are able to switch to the next slide, either Christine or Colin, we do have one question submitted so far that we can start with, but as you're loading your questions into the chat here for Colin and Christine to answer, just a reminder that next Wednesday, November 19th at 12 o'clock is the third and final webinar in the series. And if you go to the next slide, here are the CCA and OFCAF codes that you are able to scan. I know with the knowledge sharing event, one of the things is to ask questions, so feel free to start pumping in those questions here into the chat. We do have one here. Colin, I think this one's best for you. While the sufficiency approach won't get you to the same yield maximums as the build and maintain approach, is it more profitable? And have any studies been done on long-term profitability with the two approaches?
Yeah, so great question. And I think that's kind of a key factor is that short-term profitability compared to the long-term profitability. So the sufficiency approach in any single year is going to or aims to give you the maximum profitability of fertilization in that given year. So applying, to build those soil test levels up, applying more than that sufficiency approach in a single year is less profitable, but it's that longer term approach that you're looking for. And so the question about how that profitability effect over the long term, to my mind, there's not a fantastic research that's been done on that profitability level because there's so many different variables that come into play. So I think the key factors to that are where you're starting from. So a low testing soil is going to take a lot more nutrient and a longer time to get to that maybe a specific goal. But it's kind of you know, the key advantage to profitability with that is the flexibility that you've got. So even though it's taking more fertilizer over time to to get to a moderate testing level, that obviously costs you more. But the flexibility within that means that a higher test level, you can afford to cut back on your fertilizer rate. You don't need to apply, 150 pounds of MAP for each and every corn crop. As the price of phosphate fertilizers increases, then we can choose to cut back, and maybe we're putting, just a crop removal value on. Maybe we're putting less than crop removal value on because we've got that nutrient bank built up a bit more that we can draw it down some. So it's kind of a situation that is going to differ for each and every farm in terms of that short-term versus long-term profitability. But it's something that, given enough time, I think there's that flexibility and the kind of that baseline yield that you can expect with that build and maintain approach. I think there's definitely room that it's more profitable over the long term.
I'm just going to add one comment. And the opportunity with some of the organic amendments that are CFIA fertilizer products, there's a big variety in what you can get. And so you've got some that have nutrients, but they also have lime. There's some that have very high phosphorus with very little nitrogen. So if you're trying to balance or build your soil fertility levels, and you're looking at organic amendments, take a look at what each one offers and look at the economics of it. Because sometimes if you're looking for overall fertility, you might have more economics in purchasing a poultry manure that's a little bit more expensive, but you need a lower rate. Or in some cases, you're better to get something that has the lime and is also going to add some potash or some phosphorus.
Great comments from both of you. Thank you. There's one other question. If you do still have questions, feel free to put them into the chat. But the one question here is, some agronomists say spend your first dime on lime, and some say to balance your soil fertility, and some say balance your soil fertility and pH will take care of itself. Where do these two philosophies come from, and which should Ontario farmer follow?
So in my mind, in my mind, I am absolutely of the camp that pH is the most important characteristic of our soils that we can really have an effect on. So it's so incredibly important that that pH is in that zone where we want it, from approximately 6 to 7.5, depending on the crop. Because it plays into the availability of those macronutrients that we've got and the micronutrients. But at a low pH, the vast majority of our phosphorus is tied up in with other elements within the soil, like iron or other precipitates. At high pH, it's tied up again with other elements like calcium. And so having that pH within the zone that we want is going to do more to give us a better availability of that phosphorus than building up those soil test levels. So to me, I think we need to focus on that pH. If the pH is an issue, if it's low, spend that first dollar on getting that pH in check, because that's going to build up your available phosphorus or potassium more than bumping up trying to build your rate by 10% or 20%, anything like that. So to me, that's the number one approach, is your pH should be first.
And we've got a question here for Chris. Chris, can you cover off how manure equipment is calibrated to apply the correct amounts?
That's an excellent question, because we can know what the exact amount we need is, but if we're not applying it at the rate, if we don't know what we're applying, then how do we get the right rate on? So it's become a little bit easier with some of the equipment that we've got. if we're using a tanker with a splash plate, then we really need to have a good idea of what is the application width, and then what is your distance between your passes. It's a lot easier with some of the dribble bar type technology, some of the incorporation equipment where we've got macerators that are spreading that into the tubes and applying it uniformly across the whole width of the equipment. Really, it's important to, I guess the easiest is, well, the best is to put down containers and to actually measure what you're putting on, but not too many people do that. So the next best would be to say, okay, how far is my tanker going? Or in drag hose equipment, it's a little bit harder, but you've got the calibration right at the pump. But with a tanker, how big is that tanker? How much manure is in that tanker? How far is it going? What's the application width? How much is one load covering on the acreage? And then assuming that you're putting it on uniformly based on that calibration. But it's one that takes time. There are, with solid manure, there's a lot more load cells, and there's equipment that shows you exactly what you're applying, but it does still take some effort, and it's important. Thanks for asking that, Marty.
Great. And one question that just came in, thanks for answering that so well, Chris. That was, yeah, as you said, a great question. And the next question here, is lime more expensive than fertilizer? How do they compare?
So it really depends on, I guess, for lime, first of all, your rate that you need. And secondly, unfortunately, where you're located. In a lot of cases, the lime itself isn't the determining factor in cost, it's the transportation. If you happen to be in an area that is far away from a source of limestone, it can cost substantially more. But in general, if it's something that you need a relatively low rate of lime every few years, it is your cheapest source to well, really affect your entire fertility levels and available nutrient fertility. And yeah, I guess I would say that kind of no matter where you're located, I think it's still the number one way to improve that soil fertility. Even if it is expensive, to me, I'd rather see a pH be adjusted even on a low testing soil, even if that means cutting back on your phosphorus and potassium until you can get that pH where you want it, get it balanced a bit more to that zone that fits the crop. Even if you've got to cut back the rate, and if your rate calls for 10 ton to the acre on a specific soil, cut that in half or cut that in a third, do it over multiple years to bring that cost down some. I think that's still where your best dollar is spent, or maybe your best $50 or $100 per acre, compared to trying to build that soil up or improve that fertility without adjusting that pH.
And then just to comment on some of the limed biosolids, it's important to get the liming value tested, because, for example, biosolids ash, it takes about 1.9 tons to equal 1 ton of ag lime. For some of the lime biosolids like the Enrich, or it has different names, but it's about 50% calcium carbonate equivalent to ag lime. There's another product where it's about 2.3 tons for 1 ton equivalent. So it's really important, if you're finding that the organic amendment is partially being applied to improve your pH, get it tested.
Yeah, and that's a good factor no matter what you're using, whether it's an organic amendment or even an ag lime. Quality does matter when it comes to lime, and if you've got a relatively low neutralizing value and they're ground into large chunks of gravel instead of a fine powder, a cheaper source or at a lower quality isn't going to do you as good a job as a bit more expensive source that's actually got some high quality to get to work. So yeah, no matter what source of liming material or amendment you're using, I think it's important to have that quality tested.
Some great comments, great questions, and overall, thank you again, Colin and Christine, for joining us. And thank you to all who are watching for your attention and your questions. And stay tuned next Wednesday for the third and final webinar. Oh, I just see it. One more question came in here. Hoping for your thoughts on nitrogen inhibitors. Well, if we can answer that one.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of addition to fertilizer, and maybe I'll let Chris touch on how they work with manure, but yeah, they absolutely do work. Science has shown over multiple research studies worldwide as well as in Ontario. The science is there. They do work. They do limit, depending on the type, volatilization or denitrification or leaching. And so depending on what your operation looks like, they may have a fit. It really depends on the economics. So if you've got a situation where you're broadcasting urea on the soil surface, uh, not working it in, you're on no-till ground, putting it on at the start of the season ahead of planting, no real rain in the forecast, it's going to pay dividends to put that nitrogen inhibitor on if it protects against volatilization. On the other hand, if you're more or less spoon feeding your crop, uh, putting on some nitrogen up front, having it incorporated, going in at side dress time and injecting that nitrogen with UAN in under the soil surface, then the economics say it's still going to prevent loss. It's just you've got less loss potential to begin with, so it's going to be take a bit more to really pay for that. So that being said, if you're in a situation where you're not sure whether you're getting enough coverage or you're incorporating that nitrogen deep enough or the weather looks uncertain ahead, it is a relatively cheap insurance policy compared to adding more nitrogen to your plan and potentially getting no benefit from that extra nitrogen.
When it comes to manure, so far the research hasn't been that positive on it. Ideally, we would have a nitrogen inhibitor that you could apply in manure going onto the field in late fall, so that volatilization and that the nitrate didn't get lost with the water. But the trouble is that once you get to temperatures over 10 degrees in the spring, then it starts breaking apart and we still lose it. I think there's some interesting research happening. There's a potential with biochar potentially to hold some of that ammonia, but it's being researched right now. We don't have actual data yet. So I think that where you're applying manure, the nitrogen inhibitor is going to work better with any nitrogen fertilizer that you're applying than with the manure right now.
Comments. I'm going to go. Brendan, you've got your hand up if you want to unmute, and then I'll jump back to the chat.
Sure. Can you guys talk a little bit specifically on the biosolids or the biofertilizer products, what the best way to credit those is? Sometimes we get a fertilizer analysis on those products, or the customer does, and sometimes we get, something different. And it kind of gets to the point where you question a little bit what some of the values are, whether we're actually getting those nutrients in the year of application or further down the road. So just what the best way to work with some of that stuff is, because we've definitely run into situations where we thought we're not getting out of it what we are supposed to based on the analysis.
Yeah, that is an absolutely excellent question. I would recommend, because they're going to give you the label and it's going to have a guaranteed minimum. And we've done here's the guaranteed minimum. They've been tested at the lab with a manure test. and the numbers are totally different. Most of the time, quite a bit higher. I would say anytime that you're applying organic amendment, take an analysis, get a manure test on it. A manure test that includes carbon to nitrogen ratio, because that will give you an idea of how quickly the nitrogen portion will be available. If there's a high aluminum and iron level, it will take a little bit longer probably for the phosphorus to become available, especially if your pH is a little bit on the low side. But the best way to get an idea of what's going to be available from that amendment is going to be with an actual manure test, ideally taken at the time of application.
Chris, one other question here that's came into the chat. Can humic acid added to manure pits prevent volatilization?
So humic acid, I was talking a little bit before about biochar, so I think that's kind of along the same lines. I think so. There's so many different products out there, and they all have different claims. Most of them will do what they say they're going to do, but sometimes not economically. So it really depends on how much do you need to add, what are you trying to prevent. But humic acid, it would make sense, like same with the biochar, if you've got something that can hold, has a high CEC and can hold nutrients, it's probably going to help. But when it's added, how it's added, that's going to be product specific.
Sounds great. I think that is all the questions that have came in. If anyone has the last minute, please feel free to put it in the chat. But again, just thank you to you both for presenting here today. Always great to see so many great questions coming in too. And thanks to everyone who has attended. And I hope you've all gained something to take back to the field for this upcoming cropping season. So with that, I will end the webinar, but thank you to everybody again.